Okay, I'm terribly sorry for the technical difficulties. I was just trying to demonstrate if anyone has any computer problems in planning for any of the Yom Tovim, just contact Menashe Katz from Smart Computers. That's what I was trying to demonstrate to everybody. I'm very sorry. Thank you as always to Miriam Friedman for spearheading this project. And thank you to all the people who submitted questions. Though I'm terribly sorry that we started late. There's actually not that many questions this time. My guess is, as it happens every time, once we start with questions, it'll probably get things going in people's heads. So what I think we'll do is we'll kind of discuss a few topics on a given Yom Tov, then pause to see if there's any more questions on that Yom Tov before we go on to the next Yom Tov. Okay. The first questions are about Rosh Hashanah, okay? And they have to do with shofar blowing. So I believe the intent of the questions, which are certainly very thoughtful questions, have to do with how does it work with brachos if a person is blowing shofar at home for himself and his spouse? Scenario one, scenario two, if a person is blowing that they've already been yotze, let's say they've already been yotze in shul, and then they're going to blow for a man, a woman, a group. Is this all the same? Does it matter in terms of the brachos? Okay, so I have to kind of lay a little bit of a groundwork here. This is a very interesting question on a number of levels. So the first issue is, when do I make a bracha on a mitzvah? I make a bracha when I'm fulfilling a mitzvah. That's abundantly clear, right? It would be wrong for me to pick up a lulav and esrog right now and make a bracha on it. I don't have a mitzvah to do lulav and esrog right now. It's not Sukkos, right? That would be God's name in vain. Let me ask you a question. Let's say I made a bracha on lulav and esrog on the morning of the first day of Sukkos, and then I liked it so much I wanted to try again. I want to do lulav and esrog a second time on the first day of Sukkos. May I make a bracha on that? No, because I already fulfilled the mitzvah. It's the equivalent of making a bracha today on lulav and esrog. I don't have the mitzvah anymore. I did it already. Okay, so I can only make a bracha on one fulfillment of, on the first time I fulfill the mitzvah, not on the second or third time I fulfill the mitzvah. It's not a mitzvah for me anymore. Statement number one. Question. Let's say I already fulfilled the mitzvah, but I'm facilitating your fulfillment of the mitzvah. Okay, so now shofar is a wonderful example of that. A person blew shofar. There are many wonderful, kind people in our community who blow shofar various times in a day on Rosh Hashanah. So they were yotze in shul, or they were yotze the first time they blew. Now they're blowing a second time, a third time, a fourth time. Who should be making the bracha on that mitzvah? Ideally, the one who should be making the bracha on that mitzvah is the one who's fulfilling the mitzvah, not the one who's blowing the shofar. In shul, the shofar blower makes the bracha because he's also fulfilling the mitzvah at that moment. Everybody's fulfilling the mitzvah at that moment. So the shofar blower who's actually doing it, he should be the one to make the bracha. But if a shofar blower comes to your house and he's already fulfilled the mitzvah, you ideally should be the one to make that bracha. That's statement number one, okay? Now, let's say you're not comfortable making the brachos. Heaven forbid, if maybe a person is sick and they're not well and they're not up to making the brachos, heaven forbid. Or what's very common is maybe the person's not so comfortable with reading Hebrew, or maybe the person's embarrassed to say the bracha. Maybe they're worried that if they mispronounce a word, the shofar blower is going to blow the shofar at them or something. Who knows, what they're worried about, but maybe the person's uncomfortable. Is the shofar blower allowed to make the bracha for them? He's already fulfilled the mitzvah himself earlier in the day. Is he allowed to make the bracha if the person who's fulfilling the mitzvah is not comfortable making the bracha? So there's a very interesting halacha. And we say that Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh Lezeh. We're all obligated to help each other perform mitzvahs. So I asked you, if a person picks up a lulav and esrog for the second time on Sukkot, should they make a bracha? The answer is, of course not. They did it already that day. But this person who's blowing the shofar for another Jew who hasn't yet fulfilled the mitzvah, though they've personally fulfilled the mitzvah of shofar, they're doing a great mitzvah by facilitating another Jew's mitzvah observance. And therefore, though ideally the person fulfilling the mitzvah should make the bracha. If for whatever reason they're not comfortable making the bracha, the shofar blower may make the bracha because the shofar blower is performing the mitzvah. The mitzvah is facilitating the mitzvah observance of another Jew. Okay, that's statement number 2. Question. Let's say that other Jew is not obligated in the mitzvah. Let's say that other Jew is not obligated in the mitzvah. For whatever reason that may be, the other Jew is not obligated in the mitzvah. May the shofar blower make a bracha on the fact that they're blowing shofar for this person who's not obligated to hear shofar? Well, that's not such a mitzvah anymore. It's not such a mitzvah because they're not even obligated to hear shofar. Okay. Now, there's a very interesting thing when it comes to women and the mitzvah of shofar. The mitzvah of shofar is a mitzvah aseh shazman grama. The mitzvah of shofar is a positive, time-oriented mitzvah. If I blew shofar today, I'm not yotze the mitzvah. It's only if I blow it on Rosh Hashanah. And it's a positive mitzvah. The normal rule, as opposed to prohibition, the normal rule, though there are exceptions, but the normal rule that for a positive time-bound mitzvah, women are not obligated. Technically speaking, women are not obligated in the mitzvah of shofar. I repeat, there are many exceptions to this general principle, but shofar is not one of them. Technically speaking, women are not obligated in the mitzvah of shofar. Okay? Having said that, even though women are technically speaking not obligated in the mitzvah of shofar, it's a generally accepted practice in Klal Yisrael that women make it their business to hear shofar. That's a famous statement from Rabbi Kiva Eger, that even though technically speaking, women are not obligated in the mitzvah of shofar, the mitzvah of shofar is such a precious mitzvah, such a special mitzvah, that really the practice is women really, really make great effort, as I'm sure many people here can attest, whether in their own life experiences, whether it be people that they know or they've seen. Women make really normally just as much of an effort as men to hear shofar on Rosh Hashanah. As an aside, every now and then I get asked the question, imagine the following situation. Let's say, I don't know, there's a family member in the hospital and there's no shofar blower coming to the hospital, and one member of the family can leave the hospital to go to shul or the community, whatever is to your shofar blowing. It could be the father or the mother, for example. Is there a hierarchy as to what should be, based on what we're saying? If only one of them is going to hear shofar, it should certainly be the father, because the father is a Torah mitzvah to hear shofar on the first day of Rosh Hashanah. The mother, again, the vast majority of the time, women do everything they can to hear shofar, but the bottom line is, technically speaking, women are not obligated to shofar. So on that very technical point, may a shofar blower who's already fulfilled the mitzvah himself make a bracha to facilitate a woman hearing shofar. And that halach is the shofar blower is not supposed to make a bracha on that. I want to emphasize that's not to say that women shouldn't hear shofar. That's not to say that the women hearing shofar on Rosh Hashanah is not very special. It is very special. But on a purely technical point, a person who's already fulfilled the mitzvah of shofar may make a bracha to be motzi a man in shofar, but not a woman. Which does raise the ante if it's one woman or a group of women all waiting to hear shofar, if at all possible, really one of the women should be the one to make the bracha. Okay, that's one thing. Now, if it's a group of people hearing shofar, and they're going to fulfill the mitzvah at this moment, a man and a woman. So then, if someone's going to make the bracha for the group, it should be a man, because the man has the Torah mitzvah of doing the shofar, and the woman doesn't. So the man has a greater level of obligation in this specific mitzvah. But B, if nobody wants to make the bracha, or if the man doesn't want to make the bracha, the shofar blower may make it with the man in mind. Okay, so I know this is confusing. The specific question asked was, if a husband and wife are at home and the husband's going to blow the shofar, and he's fulfilling the mitzvah right now, he certainly should be the one to make the brachos. If the husband was yotze in shul and he's just blowing for his wife, the wife should make the brachos. By the way, if for some reason in that case the wife's not able to make the brachos, not whatever, you could still fulfill the mitzvah without making the bracha, but you just wouldn't make the bracha there. If a person is blowing for a group of people who have not yet fulfilled the mitzvah, okay, so then the hierarchy is as follows. If a man is present who has to still fulfill the mitzvah, the best thing is for that man to make the bracha for everybody present. Statement number one. If that man is not comfortable making the bracha, the shofar blower should make the bracha for everybody present. If the only people who need to fulfill the mitzvah are women, one of the women should be the one to make the bracha. And if none of the women want to make the bracha, the shofar blower does not make a bracha. They just listen without brachos. Okay, I hope that made sense. I'm going to just take one more question, and then we're going to open it up for a few minutes for just questions involving Rosh Hashanah. Actually, you know what? It's late enough. We're just going to go through all the questions, and then we'll go back to take any questions. Okay. Okay. I should not have been surprised that this question came up. This is probably one of the most common questions I get asked on Rosh Hashanah. What's the story with not eating nuts? What's that all about? What's the story with not eating nuts? Is it only Rosh Hashanah? Is it for beyond Rosh Hashanah? Which nuts? Okay, so first of all, I want to be very, very clear about this. There's not a prohibition about not eating nuts. Okay, there's not a prohibition about not eating nuts. There's a common minhag in Klal Yisrael. It's a real minhag. It's not a silly minhag. It's a real minhag. But there's a common custom in Klal Yisrael not to eat nuts. The Ramah cites the minhag. What is it about? The Ramah says two very different reasons. First of all, the Ramah says it about an egos. Okay? Egos is a specific type of nut. Some translate egos as walnut. Some translate egos as hazelnut. Okay? That's all the Ramah says it about, just for the record. What's wrong with nuts? So there are two reasons cited for why one wouldn't eat nuts on Rosh Hashanah. One reason is because nuts have a way of increasing phlegm, and it might be more difficult for a person to daven with focus on Rosh Hashanah because they're trying to say words and it's uncomfortable in their throat. That's one reason. The other one is very interesting. The gematria, the numeric equivalent of the word egos, is 17, okay? And that's very close to the gematria for the word chet, sin. We know, of course, that on Rosh Hashanah, we're very focused on signs and omens and the like, so nuts is something we want to stay away from. That's the reason for the minhag, okay? But I repeat that the basic reading of what the Ramah said applies to walnuts and hazelnuts. I think a certain number of people expand it to all tree nuts. If a person has that practice, they're not crazy. I see no reason to expand it to peanuts. I'm not aware of a source for the custom extending beyond the days of Rosh Hashanah. So again, it's a common custom in Klal Yisrael. It's an accepted custom in Klal Yisrael. To the best of my knowledge, it's only about walnuts and hazelnuts. To the best of my knowledge, it's only for the days of Rosh Hashanah, those 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. I think some people extend it to all tree nuts in general, though I'm not aware of a strong source for that. Okay, I hope that I answered that question. Okay, I have decided we're just going to go through all the questions, and then there'll be plenty of time for questions on all these things at the end. Okay, this is a really important question. And then if I hadn't done so already, thank you to all the people who posed questions. It's very helpful to all of us. Okay, the question is a request for a general rule of thumb. If a person ends up davening at home this Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur, what's a general rule of thumb for what one does daven and what one doesn't daven? First of all, I'll mention we actually sent out a document last year. Some of you might remember. It's really like literally page by page. If people have interest in the document, maybe let me know in the chat or let me know by email or something, and maybe we'll try to figure out how to circulate it. But let me give the general rule of thumb. The general rule of thumb is as follows. Let's first talk about Rosh Hashanah. Generally speaking, all of the davening of Rosh Hashanah could be said when one is davening at home, except one doesn't say Kaddish when one is davening without a minyan. One doesn't say Baruch Hu when one is davening without a minyan. And here's the big time difference. Anything in the Chazin's repetition, there's no obligation to daven if one is davening without a minyan. Those things are in the Chazin's repetition. So when you really think about it, for the record, the big time consumer in the Rosh Hashanah davening is not the rabbi's speech. Okay, let's just clarify that, everybody. It might feel that way, but that's not my problem. That's your problem. The big time consumer in the Rosh Hashanah davening, and of course it's so meaningful, is the Chazin's repetition. In the Chazin's repetition, there's all these beautiful tefillos in the Chazin's repetition. Now, the Chazin's repetition could really be broken up, I would say, into three sections. The actual repetition of the Shemona Esrei itself, which you can figure out what's a repetition of Shemona Esrei, because you can look at your own siddur and see what you just said in Shemona Esrei. Kedusha. Kedusha is, of course, very special. We're used to Kedusha in general when we have Chazan repetition of davening. Kedusha we don't say if we don't have a minyan. But then there's one more thing, which is the Pieutum. Pieutum are just beautifully written prayers that are traditionally said as part of the Chazan's repetition to bring out some of the beautiful feeling of the day. Nisana Tokef, for example, is a piyut. There's no obligation to say the Pieutum. There's no obligation to say the Pieutum in general. I don't know if people remember, we had a really, really, really streamlined davening last year, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And no, we're not doing it this year. But part of what we did is we basically took out, that was for health reasons, we basically took out practically all of the Pieutum. And technically speaking, I could have omitted Nisana Tokef as well, but I just felt we wanted to give that experience to people. Even with a minyan, you're not obligated to say the Pieutum, but we traditionally say the Pieutum. Certainly, if you're davening alone, you don't say the Pieutum. You don't need to say the Pieutum. The Pieutum, unlike Kaddish or Kedusha, or just repeating the Shemona Esrei, if one wanted to say them, there'd be nothing wrong with saying them. Okay? There are many Pieutum for which the Aron is normally opened. It's fine to say them, even if one is davening at home with no Aron. That's totally fine. There's no obligation to say it, but one may say it. Avinu Malkeinu, by the way, comes after the Chazin's repetition. Avinu Malkeinu. If a person is davening at home, they should say Avinu Malkeinu. That's not only can say, a person really should say. Okay. Okay. Fine. That's Rosh Hashanah. Okay. I should also clarify one point. I could have said it in the question about shofar, but I'll say it now. If a person is not davening with the minyan, there's only an obligation to your 30 shofar blows. Okay? The idea of the 100 shofar blows has to do with things involving the Chazin's repetition, has to do with other practices once we've already blown shofar so much. The basic mitzvah is 30 shofar blows. Okay? So if a person was davening at home and they wanted to, let's say, fill in the Pieutum, that's fine and well. There's really no reason to blow more than 30 shofar blows if a person is davening privately at home. The 30 shofar blows are, for example, if you look at the page in the Machzor, the first time we blow shofar, we've occupied all 30 of those shofar blows if you do those shofar blows. Okay. Now let's talk about Yom Kippur. If a person is davening Yom Kippur at home, Yom Kippur is a little more complicated. The reason why Yom Kippur is a little more complicated is because of slichos. We have in the davening of Yom Kippur, generally speaking, associated with the Chazin's repetition, we have beautiful, meaningful prayers that ultimately lead into the vidui, the confession ay, 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 ashamnu, bakadnu, etc. We say the ashamnus at the end of the silent Shemona Esrei. There's no obligation if one is davening alone at home. There's no obligation to say the ashamnus a second time in Shacharis or a second time in Musaf. We said the ashamnus already. For Shacharis, you say the Shacharis once. You say the ashamnus once in Shacharis. You say the ashamnus once in Musaf. But let's say a person wanted to say the slichos, the different very meaningful prayers having to do with asking God for forgiveness. Certainly a good idea to say them if one is davening alone at home. Probably more meaningful to say them than to say the Pieutum, the general Pieutum, though when it's not obligated, but it makes sense to say them. But there's one thing that you're not allowed to say if you're davening alone at home. And the thing that you're not allowed to say if you're davening alone at home is the Yud Gimel Midos, the 13 divine attributes of mercy. Actually, that's what Rabbi Postalnik's series has been on. Can't remember if he's already discussed this issue or he will discuss this issue, but there's a halachic issue about not saying the 13 attributes of mercy when davening alone. It's so lofty, it's so sacred that one is only supposed to say it when in the presence of a minyan. Technically speaking, one is allowed to say it if one goes through the full psukim in which the 13 attributes are found and like reads them with the cantillation notes, the Balkori reads them. It's complicated. The bottom line is one normally doesn't say the 13 attributes of mercy if one is davening alone. So that's something that we do not say when davening alone on Yom Kippur. There are a few, 2 or 3 parts of davening, small parts that are in Aramaic. Besides the Kaddish, the Aramaic one is not supposed to say when davening alone. I see Menashe has been saving files. He's been writing it in the, or sharing files. He's been writing it in the chat. I suppose those are the files that we sent about davening alone on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. So for literally page by page things, it's in there. Okay, thank you for raising that question. It's a very valuable question. We're actually almost done with the questions. Then we'll just open up the floor. Jumping ahead to Sukkos. Person says they just found 2 old esrogim that weren't burnt on Pesach. What do you do with them? The question is also posed about lulavim. What's the story? So this is a great question in general. When it comes to special items, broadly speaking, there's 2 categories. One kind of special, in terms of disposal, one kind of special item is something that's really kadosh, that's really sacred, such as a Sefer Torah. That's the extreme example. Tefillin, a mezuzah, Svarim, Torah books. These things are very sacred, and if a person, it's not a small thing to dispose of them, and if a person was going to dispose of them, it would be appropriate to put it in shemus, which ultimately gets buried in the ground, and heaven forbid to throw it in the garbage. Those are things that are considered sacred. They're sacred because there's a name of God in them. There's the sanctity of the Torah associated with them. Those are very, very special things. And by the way, I don't want to go too far afield now, but even things that don't have the verses in them but come in contact with these things are frequently also treated like that. So for example, the mantle of Sefer Torah, if I remember correctly, also has to be put in shemus, for example, even though there's not parchment on the mantle, but it's in such close contact with it as a unique status. But what about things that are used for mitzvos? What's the status of things that are used for mitzvos? An esrog, a lulav. Let's just stick with those examples for now, an esrog and a lulav. So what's the story? So basically, the story is as follows. The story is that once the time for the mitzvah has passed, it's no longer considered sacred, not at all, but one is supposed to treat them with respect, even after the time of the mitzvah has passed. It's disrespectful to throw your esrog in the garbage with your banana peel. It's disrespectful. It's really inappropriate to do it during Sukkos. But even after Sukkos, it's considered disrespectful to put it in your kitchen garbage with everything else. What are you supposed to do with it then? So the most famous example is with the lulav. there's an idea of using the lulav as fuel when burning your chametz. So the idea is that you started using it for one mitzvah, and now it's appropriate to use it for another mitzvah as well. And in that second mitzvah, the burning of the chametz, you're consuming the lulav as you're using it to perform the mitzvah of the burning of the chametz. So you're disposing of it in a mitzvah way. That's ideal for mitzvah items. But let's say you're not making a big fire. Let's say you're not even making a fire for Pesach. Or let's say you forgot. So then the general principle in halacha is once the Yom Tov is over, you're just supposed to dispose of it in a respectful way. What does that mean? Basically speaking, two options. One is you can throw it in the garbage, but double bag it before you put it in the garbage. So it's not with the other garbage. It's not with your leftovers from supper. You double bagged it. The other option is to put it, let's say, in the vegetation recycling, that you put like tree branches and things like that. It's not disgusting in there. So that would be the other option. Again, ideally, it's great to burn the lulav along with the chametz. But if that, for whatever reason, didn't happen, it's fine. It's not a big deal. You could just double bag it and put it in the garbage. And the same thing for the esrog. Now, I should mention, and this is not the time, but just for the back of your mind, that when an esrog is from Shemitah, it's a whole different story. Okay? And that is relevant, not for this Sukkos, but it's going to be relevant, God willing, for next Sukkos. The Shemitah year begins with Rosh Hashanah, but even though the Shemitah year begins with Rosh Hashanah, the esrogim that we'll use this year don't have Shemitah status because they really came to growth before the Shemitah year began. So the esrogim that we'll use, not in a few weeks, but in a year and a few weeks, God willing, if they come from Israel, there'll be Shemitah-related questions about that. And so rules about disposal of that will be a little bit different next year. God willing, we'll all be together in Yerushalayim with the coming of the Mashiach. But if not, we'll probably have another one of these classes before that time, and we'll talk about it then. But just once we're somewhat within range, it's good to at least have in mind a little bit. Okay. And this, we're now going to pose the last question that's been submitted beforehand. And again, thank you to all the wonderful questions that were submitted, and then we'll open it up. Okay, let me read the question. The person's gardeners come weekly on different days to cut the grass. They also do various work in the yard. How is a person supposed to handle that in terms of Yom Tov? We know that the general rule is if a non-Jew is doing work for the sake of a Jew on Shabbos or Yom Tov, it's a problem. It's a problem even if I didn't ask them to do it, right? It's a misconception that as long as I'm hinting, it's okay. That's not so. There are very specific halachos about that. Maybe we'll discuss that one of these times. So, I mean, they showed up on your yard. They're there to mow your lawn. They're there to, trim your bushes, whatever it is. They're doing it for you. They're not doing it for their own health. Yes, they're doing it because they want to be paid, but they expect you to pay them because they're doing you a service. So ideally, they shouldn't be doing it in your property on Yom Tov. There are actually even halachos that it's more serious when it's on your property. The reason it's more serious when it's on your property normally is because we're worried that people will see and think, oh, it must be Rosenbaum asked them to come on this day. So how does this play out? So let's discuss this in stages. The first point is as follows. If I asked a non-Jew to do a task for me, and I don't ask them to do it on Shabbos or Yom Tov, and there's no reason they need to do it on Shabbos or Yom Tov, and they just do it on their own on Shabbos or Yom Tov, it's not considered that they're doing it for me. It's considered they're doing it for themselves. The classic example of that is dry cleaning. Okay, person shows up at the dry cleaner on Thursday, and the person shows up Friday morning with a suit they want to get cleaned, and they say, do me a favor, I want to pick it up on Monday. Is that a problem? Of course it's not a problem. You're not asking them to do it on Shabbos. If they wanted, they could do it during the day today before Shabbos starts. So if they end up doing it on Shabbos, that's their business. I didn't ask them to do it on Shabbos. Now, if I showed up 3 minutes before Shabbos began and I say, listen here, I have an event to go to Saturday night. I'm showing up 5 minutes after Havdalah, and you better have that suit cleaned. Well, when do you expect them to do it? It's right before Shabbos and you're picking it up right after Shabbos. When are they supposed to do it? That's a problem because you're basically asking them to do it on Shabbos. But the garden people, I'm not asking them to come on Shabbos. I'm not asking them to come on Yom Tov. I'm asking them to come whenever they come. They opted to come on Yom Tov. But we mentioned a moment ago that if it's on my property, that's a problem. This is a big issue with contractors. A person's doing work on someone's property. I get the question all the time, particularly for Yom Tov, by the way. The contractor says they want to come during the week, and it's Yom Tov. I'm not asking them to come. They've been working here for 6 months. It's a problem. It's a problem because there is a maras ayin halacha. There is a concern that passersby will think that you've commissioned the people to do the work on Yom Tov. So based on that premise, it would seem to be of concern that the yard people are there. So the bottom line is, it's not such a big deal. If you see them and you can tell them, do me a favor, do you mind coming back another day? My holiday is today and tomorrow. Do you mind coming on Thursday? If you can say that and it's not upsetting to them, that's preferable for the reason that we mentioned. Having said that, the assumption is it's so common that when people have garden work done, it's not normally done on demand for a specific day, right? We all have it. It's the norm that the garden people show up whenever they show up. And therefore, there's certainly room to be lenient. Practically speaking, if the garden people pull up and I'm home when the garden people pull up on Yom Tov, I do normally go out there and I just ask them, I said, would it be a big deal, if you pass today and come back either later in the week or next week, whatever, is that okay with you guys? And normally they're so happy that's fine with them. It's not any loss of money for them. It's not, what I don't do is if they've already started working, I don't ask them to come back another time. I think that's rude. And like I told you, I think there's a leniency. The guy's already started working. I'm going to tell him to come back, leave and come back another time. How would you feel if somebody asked you to do that? Now, if it's a contractor or a painter or something like that, then really the halacha is you're really supposed to ask them to leave. But here with the gardening, I don't think you have to do it. If it's no big deal to arrange with them ahead of time that they shouldn't come on Yom Tov, that's great. But I think for most of our arrangements, it is a big deal. I think it is complicated for most of us to get them on the phone and leave the message. I don't think you have an obligation to do that. The only thing I would say is if you show up before they've started and it's not a big deal for them to just skip you and come back later in the week, that it would be appropriate to ask. Okay, those are all the questions I've got. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to first start with people who have questions about the questions that have been discussed. So hopefully there'll be time for general questions. But firstly, does anyone have a question about anything that I discussed or any offshoots of anything that I discussed? I think we'll start with the chat, but I'm only going to take the questions connected to those. Okay, great question. May a woman blow shofar for herself? A woman may blow shofar for herself. A woman may blow shofar for herself. A woman may blow shofar for another woman. A woman may not. A man is not yotze with a woman blowing shofar for him. And I want to just be very clear why that is. That's a very technical reason. As we've discussed already, a man has a mitzvah to hear shofar in Rosh Hashanah. A woman has a very strong practice in Klal Yisrael to hear shofar in Rosh Hashanah, but it's not a mitzvah for her to hear shofar in Rosh Hashanah. She's doing a mitzvah if she does it, but she's not obligated to. And therefore, only a person who has as strong an obligation as their audience can blow shofar and have their audience be yotze shofar with them. But because a man's level of obligation is stronger than a woman may not blow for a man. but a woman may blow for herself, and a woman may blow for another woman. Okay. That's a really interesting question. Someone posed the question, is it all right after Sukkot just throw the lulav into the forest? Never thought about that. You have to assess if you think it's disrespectful. I don't think it's so disrespectful. I think it's okay. Now, if you feel it's just like some dump area of the forest, I wouldn't do that. But if it's just like an open area, I think it's okay. I think it's okay. It's an interesting question. Thank you for posing that. Okay, those are all the texts. Now, does anybody want to call out any questions having to do with what we discussed? We'll start with that. Okay, now we'll open it up. Open it up, whether by text, whether by chat, whether by just general call out the question. Any question about anything relating to the Yom Tovim of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, or Sukkos. Going once. Going twice. Wow. Okay, I'm going to stay on another moment or two more. Just I would feel bad if someone was trying to. Okay. I guess we have a shorter session. Oh, there's something new. Hold on. Okay, that's interesting. There's a question posed about may a woman, we just said a woman may not blow shofar for a man. What about may a woman say Havdalah for a man? That is an extremely technical issue as well. It's an interesting one. It's not a Yom Tov question per se. I mean, it is relevant on Yom Tov at the end of Yom Tov, but it could be, it's every week of the year, the question. So here's the story. Is Havdalah, so women are obligated in the positive time-bound mitzvahs of Shabbos. Though it's not, people have different practices. Many in our community wouldn't do it in mixed company, but technically speaking, a woman may say Kiddush for a man because they actually have the same level of obligation of Kiddush, right? Because women are obligated in positive time-bound mitzvahs of Shabbos. Now, Havdalah is a positive time-bound mitzvah. Can't make Havdalah on a Thursday, right? It's a positive mitzvah to say Havdalah. Here's the question. Is Havdalah a Shabbos mitzvah or a weekday mitzvah? You can actually sort of see it either way because Havdalah is the end of Shabbos. So how do you view it? If you view Havdalah as a mitzvah of Shabbos, then women are obligated in it, right? And therefore a woman could make Havdalah for a man. If you see Havdalah as a weekday mitzvah, so then it's a regular positive time-bound mitzvah, and women normally, Shabbos is an exception to that rule. Women normally are exempt from positive time-bound mitzvahs, which would mean women are exempt. So what's the practical application? The practical application is women, we definitely say women need to hear Havdalah because it's possible they're obligated in it. But men are definitely obligated in Havdalah, and it's not clear if women are obligated in Havdalah because of this question. So a woman really should not say Havdalah for a man, but a woman definitely should say or hear Havdalah. I hope I answered that question. Okay, hold on. We have another question. The point made is this lawn shaila is really a sukkah shaila because, you can act like you didn't notice if you're sitting in your dining room, but if you're sitting in your sukkah, you hear the lawnmower going. You have to say, that's the question. Interesting. Okay, great question. Great question. Should you tell the lawn people not to come on Chol Hamoed? Really, really, really interesting question. I appreciate that. The general rule is that anything that a Jew is not allowed to do on Chol Hamoed, a Jew may not have a non-Jew do for them on Chol Hamoed. We say we're not supposed to do lawn work on Chol Hamoed. That's maybe another time laws of Chol Hamoed would be a good topic for one of these. We say we're not supposed to do lawn work on Chol Hamoed. So truth be told, we should not have a non-Jew doing lawn work for us on Chol Hamoed. I would say, truth be told, I would say a similar thing. If you're sitting in your sukkah, like the point that was made to me a moment ago, and you're, you hear, you're sitting in your sukkah and you see the lawn people come up, it's the second day of Chol Hamoed, it really would be correct to ask them if they could come back next week. That really would be correct. But again, similarly, if they already got started, I don't think you have to worry about it. I would not say you have to worry about it. Yeah, it's an interesting question. Thank you for raising it. Great question. May a person use a bamboo mat that was not prepared specifically for sukkah? Right? You walk around the streets of Camp Mill, you'll see a ton of bamboo mats. So can you get one from Home Depot, or do you have to go online and get one from whatever Jewish source? And don't tell anybody, but the Jewish sources are more expensive, generally speaking. So what's the story? So here's the story. So there are, generally speaking, basically, there are 3 rules for what makes something kosher for schach. One is it has to grow from the ground. Check. Second is it no longer may be attached to the ground. For a bamboo mat, check. Third is it can't have status as a functional item other than use for schach. And for that, the question is, what's the general intent of such things being made? So if there's a bamboo mat that I guess is intended to be used as a welcome mat or something for people to sit on or relax on, or use as a surface to play games on, but forgive my ignorance, I don't know what people actually use bamboo mats for other than sukkahs, but they must use it for something. If it's assumed, if it was made in a secular setting, so presumably it was made for one of those other functions, we really say the halacha is you're not supposed to use something made as a functional item, whether or not it ever was used as a functional item, but it was made as a functional item, something made in that capacity. We say you're not, the halacha is it should not be used for schach. But that's the difference. The things that you buy from the Jewish sites, hopefully it was made with schach in mind. I mean, if not, they shouldn't be selling it. I hope I answered your question. A very important question. Thank you for raising it.
No.
Menashe?
Yeah, actually, just as a thought related to that, but we don't have, it should be made, quote, for schach, but it's not that it has to be like, say, tzitzis, where it has to be made lishma.
Excellent point. Excellent point. I appreciate you making that distinction. Fully agreed. It's not that it has to be made, I hereby am making it for a sukkah. It's not that. It's that you have to ask yourself, why else did they make the bamboo mat? So if they made the bamboo mat as a functional item for something or another, the fact that it was made as a functional item renders it invalid to be used for a sukkah. But you're right, Menashe. It's not like the person has to go to the mikveh first and talk about how holy the mitzvah of sukkah is. Fully agreed. Thank you very much, Menashe. Any other comments? Questions? Going once. Going twice. Okay, sold. Let's just talk for a moment, if I may. Are people still interested in this venue? I mean, is this still worth continuing to another topic? I hope so. People, maybe, I don't know. I'm not getting much of a response. Okay, I'm getting some. Okay. So I guess the next question is, what should be the next topic? So I have one new idea. I think we might be a little early on it, to be honest with you, but I'd rather be early on it than late on it. I was thinking maybe after the Yom Tovim, we would do one on Shemitah. In other words, Rosh Hashanah is the beginning of a Shemitah year. There are applications, even if you don't go to Israel at all during the year, there are applications about Israeli produce. At the end of the year, there are issues about loans. I don't know, is that of interest to people to do one on Shemitah? That would be one possibility. Then there's a number of topics that we haven't done yet. Maybe actually Chol Hamoed might be a good one. If you remember, we discussed the laws of Yom Tov, like right after Pesach. We said kind of this way people can think of things over Pesach and some big questions. So maybe Chol Hamoed would be a good one for after Sukkos. Maybe that's a good idea. Maybe we should do Chol Hamoed after Sukkos. And so people, if things came up over Chol Hamoed you were wondering about, we could ask questions about that. Another suggestion people have posed maybe things about davening, right? Maybe things about davening. So those are 3 suggestions on the board. One suggestion is Shemitah, one suggestion is Chol HaMoed, one suggestion is davening. I got 2 chats already come in, or 3 chats come in about Shemitah. Any other thoughts? A quick show of hands or signs on your boxes. Shemitah, thoughts about Shemitah, yay or nay? Got some thumbs up, okay. Anybody for Chol HaMoed? Got it. Anybody for davening? Okay, well, I mean, God willing, davening we can definitely do down the road, God willing. We'll do Shemitah next time, God willing. It'll be after the Yom Tovim. And again, it's not going to be practically relevant. It's not like it's going to be relevant like that week or anything. But you'll begin to hear things about Shemitah. You'll begin to see things about Shemitah. You should have more of a context about what people are talking about. Okay. Any other Yom Tov questions? Okay. Obviously, we have a number of weeks ahead of us. Hopefully, we should only have hopefully have an uplifting Yom Tov season, hopefully a joyous Yom Tov season. People should, of course, not hesitate to contact me about different shilas or whatever practical questions or the like. A ksiva v'chasima tova to everybody. We should all merit. Hashem should bless us all. Again, we always need Hashem's blessings, but maybe it resonates more this year at this time. We should all be blessed with a good, healthy year. We should be able to appreciate all the wonderful things that maybe we've taken for granted before the last 18 months or so. And we should all just be blessed with good health and should be able to celebrate so many wonderful things together with our families and friends, and just a ksiva chasima tova to everybody. Okay. Take care, everybody. All the best. Thank you for joining us, and thank you to the people who submitted questions. Take care. Thank you.